Okay, we are recording indeed. Hello, welcome to New Media Mentors Part 4 for our webinars for MVP on digital organizing. We are wrapping things up today. We're going to start by talking about list growth. Then we're going to talk about campaign planning and then data and metrics at the end. As per usual, go ahead, send your questions in through the chat function and we will see them. Don't hesitate. We'd be curious to hear from folks and put this in the chat. What is the primary source of your email list growth? And what is your text message list growth? Like where are you getting numbers that you might be text messaging or text banking? The answer could be your text banking folks from the voter file. It could be your text banking your membership. It could be we don't have a text program yet. You know, email list wise, you know, where are those names and numbers coming from? Oh yes, thanks, Jamicia. Reminding everybody, if you want captions to be shown on your screen, click on the arrow and then click on show subtitles. Anybody want to tell us where their list growth is coming from? While folks are getting those answers together, just a reminder of one of the reasons why we are building these lists is to turn an activist energy into organizing. And with lists, we're able to, you know, once we have people's contact information, and whether we gather it on events or online, we're then able to give them something meaningful to do. We can build relationships with them, build community with them, follow up with them. It's important to remember to thank people. We need to do that a lot more often in our communications online. And it's also about building leadership, which is ultimately, you know, the central part of organizing, is having other folks who are part of the movement take that on. So one of the first places that list growth happens is your website. If you have a website, make sure that it is easy for folks to find where to get on your email list. Oh, got one answer about list growth. We're hearing that we've grown our text list through using short codes on social and encouraging people to subscribe for updates. Yeah, that's definitely a key way to grow. And Jamicia said, yeah, that's also how she's had a lot of growth for her list as well, for text bank, for text messages. With email list signups from your website, yes, it assumes that people have a reason to go to your site or finding your site. But it's incredibly important to give them an opportunity to sign up for updates. A lot of the time people get confused between a search field on your homepage and the field to type in your email address. So make sure that's clear, and a good way to do that is to have a pop-up, a spotlight pop-up on your website where people can put in their email list, their email address. Another big thing is list swaps and working with partners. That would mean paying a certain amount of money to an organization with a bigger list. Maybe you would be working with somebody like Daily Kos. You know, God, we used to use Credo for this sort of thing a lot, and now they don't really, I don't think they really have that anymore. But the idea is that they would send your petition or your action to a segment of their list and give you back the results of that list growth. But another way to do a swap is, you know, you and a coalition partner might send each other's petitions to your list, and that could be a way that you could get your petition in front of an audience of people who aren't already on your list and then collect their information as well. And then another big route for getting that list building is where people give you their email addresses is through digital ads. Online actions. I have a whole thing on this, but the short version is getting people to sign petitions is, of course, like one of the reasons why organizations have petitions online, but it is essential for our petitions to not be bullshit. Our petitions need to be doing and asking somebody to do something that has a believable theory of change. If folks aren't familiar with theory of change, that means that the action you're asking folks to do could result in the result that you want to have happen, right? So the theory of change for this petition from Credo is that if you send a lot of petitions to Google from people who are probably Google users, that Google will, as a consumer brand, will care that people are angry about this and will change their policy. Yeah, I like that description. Jamesia says, if X, then Y for theory of change. If blank, then blank. So, you know, petitions to brands and companies make a lot of sense. If they're public-facing brands, they care about what the public is saying about them. Another example Jamesia gives is, if you donate money to the National Bail Fund, then we can send mothers home for Mother's Day. Yeah, very compelling. So when you have a compelling theory of change for your action, more people will sign it, and they also will trust your group versus a completely spammy petition. Like I think a bad petition are ones that ask someone like me, a New Yorker, to send a message to Lindsey Graham. Let me tell you, Lindsey Graham does not care what I have to say. I'm not a Republican. I don't live in his state. That's not believable. So like making sure that your petitions are something that's believable, getting them out in a timely manner, having it be interesting and shareable. Another good example, this is an Amazon petition. You know, right now you can also mark on your petition where you're getting people to sign, are you an Amazon Prime customer or not? And if they are a Prime customer, then you might have an additional thing that you would ask them to do as Prime customers to pressure the company. But these are all petitions that like people have a gut moment of, yeah, this company probably cares what I have to say about it. I'm going to sign this petition, and then I'm going to go and be in their face. This is sort of another example of what Key was talking about building SMS text messages lists. We made sure that all of the social media posts from our big public actions also had an easy way to get folks to text to join our list. You know, you'll see a lot of people doing that from the podium at events and rallies. And I know that there's fewer of those rallies right now, but we are still having them a lot. And additionally, like whenever we're having contact with folks, like we should be giving them the opportunity to do a text message to get onto our text list. We had our massive text message list growth for Make the Road when we were doing the in-person actions around the Muslim ban. Like also the texting on the flyer, basically we made sure that anybody who went to the Women's March who had an immigrant rights related sign got a flyer asking them to join our text list. Having that short code so people don't have to remember a lot of sequences of numbers is important. And definitely the social media ads pushing folks to give that text number. We did a pledge on Action Sprout, which is a tool I was telling folks about before that lets you set up pledges and collect information within Facebook, and it performs well in the Facebook algorithm. I had historically not been a big fan of pledges because a lot of them feel very vacant, but this pledge was timely and it pushed people towards going to do an actual online action. So like once we got their information, we were then able to involve them in actual organizing work we were doing. So it generated a lot of leads, and then we followed up with folks. We had a really high conversion rate of people clicking on this pledge and then getting them involved in our campaign after that. When building lists of people who are not activists or folks prone to doing activisty things, a good way to do that is to do surveys. People are used to filling out online surveys, whether or not they're used to signing a petition. Although thank you to Black Lives Matter, more people are comfortable signing online petitions now than had been recently. But list building surveys help people feel heard because you're asking them to share some thoughts about their life and what they're dealing with. We used to enter folks in a raffle or offer them some reward for doing our survey when we were doing the bank work organizing. So we would literally say, if you fill out our survey, you could be entered in a drawing for a gift card for like 20 bucks or something. I mean, really minimal, but it does incentivize people to finish filling things out. And as we mentioned before, the more questions you ask people, the fewer people will answer them, but the signups will be of higher quality. But I love asking people questions about how are they feeling, how are they doing, what challenges are they facing, and then collecting their information from those surveys. And then you're actually helping them identify issues, right? When you're doing a door, you ask people, what are the issues you're facing in your community? This is like literally doing that online, asking them what are the challenges they're facing, and have that be the conversation starter, which also dovetails with SMS, which is text messages. Jamesia, take it away.
Yeah. So inside of SMS programs, we know them to be super successful because of 95% of the people that live in the US, they own a mobile phone with SMS capabilities. 87% of the text messages do get open, and 83% is open in the first 3 minutes, right? People are constantly walking around with their phone on their phone, whether they're on social media, checking email, texting, designing, they always have a mobile device with them. And so in comparison to email, which has about the 28-33% open rate, having 83% open rate in text messages is super duper high. And texting is cheaper than canvassing, and we know that bill takes up a lot of money. And so you can contact one person for like 10 cents versus what would it cost you a couple $100 to contact that same person. And then in terms of broadcast, because text SMS programs, there can be two kinds, or three technically. You can have a peer-to-peer texting program, you can have a broadcast texting program, or you can have a mix of both. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between those two. Next slide. Yeah, so with broadcast text, it requires for you to get consent. You have to have people opt in order for you to send a broadcast text message to them. Broadcast text messages also comes from those very handy short codes that Elena talked about earlier. For example, sometimes it'll be a 3-digit, 4-digit, 5-digit number. It's not a 10-digit number ever. And then you can send that text message to everybody all at once. Literally, you set up the trail that you want people to follow and how you want them to engage, and you click a button and you can message millions of people at once. Versus peer-to-peer, which allows for you to message people one at a time, how we do normally when we're talking to folks, unless you're in a group chat. It also comes from a local number, so it doesn't look scammy or like, where I don't need this, I'm not going to open it. And it's real-time messaging, right? You get to talk back and forth to people just how we are here in this space now. And those are the biggest differences in peer-to-peer and broadcast. There are a lot of reasons on why we might want to use one or the other. And then in a chat box, when I was running blast SMS for Make the Road, we had an extremely low unsubscribe rate from broadcast text, like less than 1%, which is really good because people know that they've been opted into a program and that you're going to end up texting them or calling them. And it's an industry best practice to also just get opt-in and consent, even if you're going to run a peer-to-peer program, right? People want to know, what are you going to do with this contact information that I'm signing in on this form, this pledge, this petition, whatever it is. It's been an industry best practice to just get consent all the way around. So in case, something happens and you need to send a text all at once, you've already gotten that opt-in, and so you can use it in your campaign work. Next slide. So why might we use broadcast texting? Well, one, it's a quick and great way to reach a lot of people all at once. That's something that I talked about earlier. And then options for quizzes and sharing graphics, and a broadcast texting program can be managed by one person. It can be managed by one person because, well, one, they have a user face similar to, like, let's say a van or any CRM that you're used to. And all it takes is one person to go in and set up that script. Now, do I recommend that one person runs a broadcast text messaging program? No, I recommend that you actually have a team of folks run, but there is one person that is responsible for making sure the scripts that get made, the decisions in the trees, making sure that all that technical stuff happens. One person should be the point person for that. But in terms of the overall program, I believe that none of our work should be in silos. And also get some more resources so you can have a bigger digital team. But it can be really hard to build a list with broadcast unless you're getting people to opt in by texting your short code. With the movement for Black Lives, we had defund to 90975, and we also had defend to 90975. And we did that because we were saying out loud in multiple places, defund the police, defund the police. But we also were saying in defense of Black lives, in defense of this, we want to defend equality of life or whatever the case was. And so we ended up using those two words together in order to build our list, which was really helpful because we're able to capitalize off the thing. But yeah, but these are reasons that some people might want to use broadcast, but it is really hard to build a list with broadcast unless you're constantly popping out that short code and the message that goes along with that short code to get people on your list. Next slide. And so reasons to why people may want to run a peer-to-peer program. So let's say you have a group of people you want to reach, but you don't have permission to text them, i.e. you just got access to the voter file and you want to text people and not call people. This would be the reason to run a peer-to-peer program. Two, it allows for you to get super personal and make connections with individuals, and it allows for you to have a custom response and not a response that's already been built in, like, okay, great, you responded one, so now blah 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 blah, or maybe here's the next call to action that has been built out into that broadcast tree. But inside of peer-to-peer, it can be more individual, it can be more human, like, that didn't even make sense where we're trying to come out. But organizing is built off of relationships, and peer-to-peer allows for you to build meaningful relationships with people because of the ability to have and use custom responses. And so you can talk to a bunch of people. It's 30 times faster than phone banking with twice the engagement. And we already know that we have a super high open rate of 83%. Next slide. All right, before we jump in, peer-to-peer is also a great ask for your super volunteers to do or field staff to do themselves. Yes, yes, yes. Volunteers love doing it, so it can make your work easier, but you have to train folks in how to do it. That is correct. I am a big fan of having user guides on like the org or campaigns framework, our messaging, frequently asked questions, just a one-stop shop for volunteers and staff to feel good and take complete ownership over their work. Have that same thing for your volunteers, and it'll make your life a lot easier, and you'll see you'll end up having a lot more capacity to do a lot of things. So no-nos in terms of running SMS programs is phone banking texting. And phone banks, we have really long scripts, right? But I can say a lot of things in 5 seconds versus if I take all the things I said in 5 seconds on the phone and put it in a text messaging script, it's a lot. Nobody wants to read a paragraph or an essay, especially if we're not in a relationship where we engage that way, right? It's just weird. Why are you sending me a paragraph to my phone? This could and should have been an email. And then sending the same message repeatedly. Like if someone didn't respond to you, there's no reason why you should still be texting that same person with that same initial ask, right? Maybe you switch it up and ask something different. Maybe you remove those people from your system so you're not, one, abusing your list, because that's a quick and easy way to get people to unsubscribe and to opt out of your program. And you don't want people to unsubscribe or opt out of your program. And not actually responding. So in terms of your money tree, in terms of the tree that you will build out for your broadcast program, responses are already there. But if somebody responds with something that's outside of your tree, then one, you wouldn't know unless you're looking at the data. Two, you're not going to respond to those people because you aren't looking at the data, and not following up is not good. In regular organizing, we must always follow up. And it's the same thing inside of our text programs, is that we need to follow up, especially if you're running a peer-to-peer program and you invited people out. Send out thank yous, even if they didn't come. Like, thank you for taking the time and thinking about coming. I know you couldn't join us, but we would like to, invite you to come over here or invite you to do this thing. Like, always following up and responding with people. And then the last thing as a no-no, and this should be for any type of program you're running, is not cleaning your list. If you find out you have a lot of wrong numbers, if you find out you have a lot of disconnecteds, DCs, or non-supporters, they need to be removed from your list, or they need to be put on the do not text, because maybe the mailer program that these people should also be in, they're being touched and communicated with it over there, or maybe they prefer email. And so they're getting follow-up there and they don't want text messages. But either way, you should be cleaning your list, tagging and tracking people. Damon said, great organizers follow up. This is true. Great organizers do follow up. But sometimes great organizers can get really, really lazy and feel like they don't have to do all the things that got them to the place where they are now. So those are no-nos in terms of running text programs, but this also transcends text programs, and it can be your email program. It can be whatever. Next. Oh.
Hey, so yeah, I just have some examples of text messages that were just recent I wanted to share and get guys to weigh in on. One thing I do want to say though about having volunteers text bank is I've literally run a study to proving this, although it was not a very large study. There are people who will volunteer to text bank for you who would not volunteer to do anything else for you. I know some folks have been worried about if they ask volunteers to text bank for them, is that cannibalizing their phone bank list or their Canvas list? The answer is no. There are a lot of people with social anxiety that do not feel comfortable making phone calls, who do feel comfortable doing peer-to-peer texting. And certainly when it comes to doing doors, there's a billion people who don't feel comfortable doing doors on account of COVID, who would be happy to do something for you from home. So I really recommend building peer-to-peer texting if you are looking for meaningful things to have your supporters do now, because you will be getting people to do things for you who would not have anything to do for you otherwise. A lot of people are stuck at home. They feel desperate to be able to make a difference in this cycle, and giving them the ability to text other folks is meaningful for you and meaningful for them. So here's a text I got last night. This is for a list that I got on because I had asked about, I'd been to a training that they had done. This is a message that came from a particular person's phone number. So I am thinking it was probably a peer-to-peer message because it came from a full phone number. I did not respond to them because I did not have time to join them. But I do get these from CPD on the regular as a follow-up to an event that I participated in, a training that they hosted. This is an example of a blast list. I get texts from the AFL-CIO. I want to highlight there, they have a really easy way for me. I opted into their list, right? But they also gave me an easy way to opt out. Even though I've been on their list for a long time, they periodically check in with me to see if I want to quit the list. I like that they always say who this message is coming from. And does any, oh yeah, sorry, yes, thanks, Jamisi. A blast and broadcast are the same, just interchangeable language, that is correct. And one more example. So what do folks think about this text message that I got a couple of days ago? I want to hear what your thoughts are about it. Give me your feedback. Too long, too long. This should have been an email. Yes, exactly. Not only that though, I have no idea how I ended up on this list. And I can tell you there's times where I've been messaged in peer-to-peer where I don't know how I ended up on their list and the content was so good I didn't care. But they should have, I don't know why James Carville was messaging me. I certainly do not have a positive impression of him anyway. And yeah, this is like an entire email blast. And one more thing, it has a bit.ly link at the end. I've been told that sometimes bit.ly links in SMS messages can get them triggered as spam, whereas the AFL had a short link in theirs. This is a bit.ly link, and maybe that's not good for sending blast texts. Wow, here's a text message I got from the city of New York. How many of you guys are working on census work yourself right now? Do you think that this would be a successful text message for getting folks to do the census? Interesting. So one was not for me, meaning the message was not, meaning, sorry, meaning that the message doesn't work for you, or that you guys are not working on census stuff?
Both. We didn't have the resources to do census work. but also this for me, it doesn't make it clear how my filling in the census will change this.
So you think it would need more information? That's a good point. For me, I had like an immediate, like, because I've been in super census freakout land, I was like, thank you, New York City, for making this point to folks. But yeah, like, I also am obviously not a great test audience because I know all about the census. But I would be very happy for New York City to keep messaging people about how important the census is. And I think that, but yeah, doing additional education in that message, maybe there's another couple characters they could spare about it, might be valuable for folks. They also indicate who it's from, that this is from the Notify NYC list. Damon Hairland says, I wouldn't take action. It has too many issues listed in sentence fractions. It didn't feel personal. I know that there are character limits for SMS messages from BLAST. I don't know, Jamesia, if you have thoughts about reconciling those two factors. With like the limit in character counts versus like trying to communicate with people in a way that feels more human.
Yeah, my recommendation is always to stick to what you know, and you know you're basing your people better than anybody. So if you are already communicating with your people in a particular fashion that intervenes with word count, then don't worry about the word count. If people aren't opting out at high rates, then you're fine. But it's also a thing where I'll tell you to just test it.
Yeah.
I'm always going to recommend testing to see, because although we may know our communities the best, we also naturally are biased and we naturally also have assumptions. And so I practice testing because I could be wrong. And we also live and work in a bubble. Well, I don't know if you all do, but I live and work in my stuff. And so I'm constantly around it. And so my go-to thing is to always test it and see. And that will always be my recommendation, to try it out, because we won't know unless we try.
But definitely when I've had to try to do things like send a bilingual text message, like the character counts for BLAST was just killing me in Spanish, absolutely killing me. I had some coworkers who were able to figure out like some casual text messagey slang that we could use to try to condense it some.
Yeah, I don't know who this list. Maybe they just sent it to all of their lists because people are under.
Yeah, this went to everybody, I imagine, on the Notify NYC list. I don't think they have data about whether or not I'm an immigrant or not.
Yeah, but typically, Damon, immigrant folks, families, and communities won't fill out the census because they're afraid of deportation and splitting up their family and all sorts of other things. And I know that it may be common knowledge for some folks that they can't ask about your status or whatever, but it's not for everybody. And so the census has been something that people who live here actually have a fear of. Just because of how our society is currently set up.
And I'm kind of glad that the city of New York doesn't know in their text message list who getting text messages is an immigrant and who isn't, because there's ways that could be hurting people.
Sensitive data.
Yeah. This is a text I got from WF Working Families Party, like very soon after COVID hit. I don't know if do folks remember the color code thing at all? I feel like it didn't really get picked up much, but I thought it was like a cool idea that just didn't, and sometimes you're going to have a cool idea and it doesn't pan out, and that's that, such is life. But what I liked about this was like a wellness check SMS message. And I think that that's an SMS message this was a peer-to-peer. And I think that checking in with folks to see how they're doing through SMS messages might be a tactic that could work for a lot of folks on this call. I'm curious if anybody here has done that kind of check-in and how it went for you. I also had candidate who was running for assembly in my district reach out to me on text message to check in and how I was doing with coronavirus. And I was able to, you know, touch base with the campaign around that. So rather than just texting me to say, vote for me, the text was like, hey, this is candidate X. We're dealing, you know, COVID is really brutalizing our community. I'm wondering if you're having any challenges facing it, that you can help, you know, can we help you in some way? And it was a way for initiating some conversations around mutual aid and getting folks supplies.
Yeah, I ran a candidate wellness check text program. And this particular candidate was running against an incumbent. And so the wellness check really, really worked well in her favor, because this person has been in office for forever. And I mean, they didn't win the race, but they only lost by 438 votes.
Ooh, brutal.
Which is like super duper close. And I'm still trying to tell the candidate, like, yeah, you may not have gotten the seat this time, but what you did was powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The wellness check was our first communication to anybody in a district, which went a long way, because when people know and feel like you care about them, they will definitely show up for you. And so we did that via phone and texting. I mean, like, granted, she lost by 438 votes, but I'm positive that, like, if we had more time or things were different, that she should have and would have won.
The candidate who did this type of message to me did win in a ridiculous multi-way primary with like lots of odds stacked against her. So
yeah.
Takeaways, go ahead.
Yeah, so some key takeaways from SMS programs and what they can look like. Engaging an audience simply means that you don't always send one-off messages, right? And have a plan to follow up, just like you do in real life. And like we said in a very first session for this arc, is that, like, digital isn't magic. Digital doesn't replace organizing. We're here to replicate what we already are doing on the ground, and texting people and making sure we follow up with people is a way for us to do that same thing. Engaging your audience will help you increase your volunteer commitments and action takers. One, we already know that 83% of the people that we text will look at the text message that we send, right? So more than likely, you're going to get some yeses and you're going to get some nos, and you may get some maybe laters, and you may get some take my number off your list. But at the end of the day, running a peer-to-peer text program specifically will increase all of the commitments, all of the asks that you are making, all of the things that you want to do. You have a higher chance of getting it done if you have a very compelling message with a clear theory of change on, like, why texting Jamesia right now in this moment is important, and why must I, Jamesia, take action and do this thing, right? Being able to send those kind of messages quickly, where 83% of the people you're sending them to are going to look at it. It's going to yield yeses in general.
So I want to pivot a bit to talking about campaign planning, or as I'd like to think of it, where we pull all of these things together into a plan. I'm curious if folks have tools that you're already using for planning short-term campaigns, that you're using multiple online tools. I think it's good for the campaign planning to be a thing that ultimately is not just for digital, it's for all of the pieces of organizing together. Ooh, go forward there. I'm curious to see who's doing plans like this and what tools are you using for them. And we will dive into an example of one of the ways that we do this from New Media Mentors. So building that campaign plan and actually documenting it actually forces strategic thinking. So you're not just throwing tactics at a wall and seeing and like just not having a theory of change of why you're doing things. You're actually building strategy. It's a way to get everybody on a campaign onto the same page so that the different departments know what they're doing. And it gets easier over time because you can replicate plans and iterate them. So we start by talking about the goal, which is like, what is the goal of the campaign? The objective, theory of change, strategy, tools, tactics, and then measurement. And we'll be going into measurement at length near the end of here. So he says, we have a bunch of internal docs we use for planning and have just started mapping things out in Asana for visibility. Yes, Asana is project management platform that a lot of folks use. And we'll be sharing an example of a campaign planning template after this so that you guys can take a look at ours and see if it's helpful for you. So a goal would be establishing, like, what is a goal for your campaign? Are you going to try to pass a bill? Are you trying to fundraise money for a particular resource your organization needs? Are you trying to force a company to change a particular behavior? Or maybe you're trying to increase awareness for a public policy. I would love to hear from folks some examples of goals for what your organization is working on. I know from a couple folks here from my conversations with you, but I'd love to be able to see folks shout them out to the list, to everyone here. Objectives are something measurable you're trying to achieve to reach your goal. For example, maybe you need 2,000 petition signatures and 50 phone calls to, within the next 2 weeks. The organizing team can definitely offer some insight into like what they think a number of names and they need to move to be successful could be. Or it could be you want your report to be shared by 20 organizations that are outside of your existing network, and getting all of your existing network to share it on social media at least once. So, it doesn't have to just be about signatures. There are other kinds of goals, other kinds of objectives you can send for different kinds of campaigns, as well as things like how many people use your link to do their census. Theory of change, just reiterating, how do you expect to make the change you seek a reality? I.e., if we show legislator ABC that her constituents overwhelmingly support bill XYZ, she'll vote for it and it'll pass. If media and thought leaders use our reports framing around Indigenous rights in their Thanksgiving coverage, it'll challenge colonialist thinking and build support for Indigenous rights. A lot of people, I feel like, have a hard time coming up with theories of change around policy documents or reports or informational work they do, and it really is a doable thing. Like, this is one of the ways that I like to think about it. I also want to hear what are some theories of change that you guys have, not necessarily for your entire organization's existence, life, and meaning, but for the campaigns that you're working on right now. Throw that in the chat. Here's one from Damon. We are using digital engagement and one-on-one follow-up to create an avenue around voter suppression of Indigenous people. And do you guys feel like and what's the theory of change is that if they are in communication around voter suppression, what will happen? Example from Jamesia is if we fund base building organizations doing electoral work, we can increase their capacity to reach our people. That definitely sounds like a theory of change of Movement Voter Project. But yeah, I would suggest that when thinking about theory of change to like take it to the level of, and how is the thing you're asking people going to have the result? And what is the result you want it to have? Because engagement itself isn't a result, it's the outcome of engagement. How will that change things? Any others? If we remind voters about the human rights violations against migrant children and DACA recipients, then we will increase voter turnout of Latinx voters through digital voter engagement, direct mail, targeted media buys, direct action, and GeoTV efforts. Yeah, that definitely works. Definitely works. Strategy is how you will put your plan into action at a high level, i.e., are you going to use a member story to show how dire a situation is and move supporters to sign a petition? It kind of sounds like what Key from Ray Says was saying her group wants to do. Or maybe it's to get a hashtag to trend or increase use around a moment of compression point. Like, for example, there's a particular day of action, maybe it was Labor Day, maybe it's Election Day. Maybe you want to make sure that you have a hashtag around voting in local races trending on Election Day because you think that will make more people be aware that they have local races to vote in, for example. But that's an example of strategy. Yeah, if anybody wants help workshopping theory of change, please join us tomorrow during the office hours, which is from 2 to 3 Eastern, and we would love to sit with you and work on that together. And then we get into tactics, step 5. Is it an email to your list? Social media posts with pictures of that particular member whose story we're sharing and tagging her so that she's encouraged to share it as well. Maybe it's social media posts with a factoid from the report using popular existing hashtags that are relevant. Maybe it's Facebook ads targeting infrequent voters in specific districts that you are trying to mobilize to turn out. But you're going to probably be doing more than one tool, more than one tactic, and you're going to want to get those tools and tactics documented in your plan. And then in the end, it's measurement. How do we know, how do we measure the success of each tool so that we know where to spend our time? You know, how are we doing for email clicks and petition signatures? How many people are sharing things? Is our petition getting signed? Is our hashtag growing in popularity, i.e. people who are not literally employed by this organization and who are part of the audience we're mobilizing, are they using it? Is this framing getting mentioned in newspaper articles? So I'll be sharing a campaign planning template with you guys that'll ask you these questions and like get you to commit them to paper. And doing this could be a good use of our drop-in hours tomorrow, or you can work on this on your own with your coworkers, but I encourage you to start getting this stuff on paper. It'll make it a lot easier to move forward. And for us moving forward right now, time to talk about metrics. If there's one thing I've learned the hard way is that if you don't make a date to look at your metrics, you will not remember to look at your metrics. We are all so freaking busy, it could blow your mind. I like to put a date on my calendar and say, today, you know, this week on Wednesday at noon, I'm gonna go and look at my Facebook analytics. Or this, at the end of the month, on Friday at 4 p.m., I'm gonna make a date on my calendar and I'm gonna look and see at my email analytics, see how my email list has grown or shrunk, what emails have been opened, what is the overall trend on it, etc. Get it on the calendar or it won't happen. Go ahead, Jamesia, what you, I think you should hop on and say that.
Oh, I was defining metrics is how we track our work, and it allows for us to gauge whether or not we're on the right path to do the thing we said that we were going to do.
Excellent. So here's an example of Facebook Insights that I looked at because I made a date with my Facebook page to look at my Facebook Insights. This is from this is from Netroots Nation's Facebook page. One, I have a question for folks. Take a look at our page views, our actions on our page, our post reach. What are some things that you can learn from looking at this? You can see that this looks at the course of the past 28 days. So it's looking from August 12th to September 8th. What do you see and understand when you're looking at these metrics? And also this is what the new analytics backend looks like for folks who might not have checked it out for a while. Our content gets shared a lot. I feel like we could be doing better, but it's definitely a start. You can see from actions on page, post engagement. What else? Well, when you're looking at these charts with like the blue line, like what are you guys observing from that in terms of trending and trends and patterns? One thing that you might not know that I'll tell you is that Netroots Nation occurred between August 13th and 15th. So you can see in these charts a spike in activity around that conference. We were posting way more content. There were people who were involved in our event that was an online conference. And that momentum really pushed our materials to be particularly viral and watched during that time frame. Producing more content, had an audience paying attention because it was a compression point. And you know, by nature, there's going to be some drop off after that, but you want to try to hold on to that as much as you can. One thing I'm observing here is that story reach, which means Facebook stories, it saw a number of spikes over time. And that's because we started sharing Facebook video content from during the conference, making new Facebook stories using those videos on the regular, which was a new strategy for us. And those stories, really, the Facebook algorithm really likes stories right now. So making stories of those videos was a good way for us to keep them in the public eye, even after the event. Even though our story reach is down since the conference, there's at least been some spikes. You also were able to take, and this is a bit of an older shot, but you could take a look to see an organic reach versus from your ad money. So you can see which things are doing well based on the money you're spending versus based on how well it does on its own. And one thing to think about is if a post is doing well organically, then that's something you might want to spend money to promote, right? If your page as it is telling you that a particular thing you created is powerful and people are responding to it, then that could be a post that you might want to spend money on to promote it, to grow your audience. If it's working on your existing audience, maybe you want to advertise it to a lookalike audience for them to see it too. I also am always just like looking at my Facebook page to keep an eye on what posts are getting a lot of likes, shares, and reactions. Because you remember, you can see that underneath your posts. Facebook has a page app, Facebook Pages app, that I find very helpful. I find it actually easier to navigate using the app on my phone than even looking at things on my computer. So maybe you are making a date for looking at your analytics, and maybe you're going to do it in the park or in your backyard and do it from the app on your telephone. And yeah, you can always export this data into a spreadsheet. I have found sometimes funders want this information, but they don't really know how to understand it or look at it. So I think, and actually Jamesia is going to be talking about how we talk about data in a minute, which I think will be helpful to this conversation. But I would just be aware that whenever you're doing like an export of your Facebook Insights data, that just sending somebody that data alone doesn't really give the full complete picture or the tools to understand it. It can be easy for folks to get confused by vanity metrics when they look at it this way. We have to provide additional context. Another big takeaway is that you should measure things that will impact your organizing decisions. For example, if there's a thing that you have to do, no matter what, then maybe having a lot of time sunk into understanding how it is doing might not change what you're doing. That's the reality of how funding works sometimes. Sometimes they're like, well, you have to do this thing, and we're like, this thing might not be working so much. I would focus on, within that category, measuring the things that will impact your organizing decisions within that campaign. Because if you're spending a lot of time understanding your data and it doesn't change what you're doing, then it's a waste of time. You want to be able to do things that are actionable and measure things that will impact the decisions that you make going forward. So I like this quote from the Open Government Foundation, which is, advocacy groups can't just count the number of names on a single petition. To do right by their members, they need new metrics to more accurately understand and reflect the strength of the relationships activists are building. And that gets us to data. Take it away.
Yeah, so last week we talked, not last week, our last session, I talked a little bit about data and how it powers and informs our work. And so this week we're going to go a little bit different. I mean, a little bit deeper. And so data allows for us to do a lot. We talked about how it helps powers our work, but the data behind everything that we're doing will help us find our people. And I know right now that's a really big question. How do I build communities online? How do I find the people? Or how do they find me? And the answer to that is understanding your data and being able to look at it and to know where your people are. And if you don't know, then creating a really short survey to figure out what platforms your people are on will guide and dictate what platforms you should be on, because this is where the people who already support you are. And so obviously there are going to be more people there. They just don't know about you yet. Data also allows for us to connect with our people more meaningfully. I talked a little bit about this in terms of organizing and in terms of the texting earlier today. At the end of the day, how we use data is the same. Like, we should always be organizing and we should always be testing. And it doesn't matter what I'm talking about. A lot of this stuff will sound the same, because our work shouldn't be in silos, because we're actually doing a lot of similar things with one another, right? And so data not only allows for us to connect with our people more meaningfully by telling us where they are, what they do like, what they listen to, and we can use that and implement those things in our work and strategies. Data also gives people a sense of their own power. You, as the person or people running these entity orgs and campaigns, will have a fuller picture of, this is the power we wield. And so then writing those grant reports, recaps, and summaries to the funders will become super easy for you, because you already fully understand the power that your org, or the power of the work that you're doing and where it lies. And then it becomes easier for you to talk about to those funders and when you're doing grant recaps. So data also allows for us to get more time to be with our people by making strategic use of limited resources. So if you have a one-person digital team, you definitely want to be looking at your data to figure out, how can I spend less time doing behind the scenes work and actual more time organizing and being with our folks. And then data also allows for us to win concrete improvements in people's lives. For example, in Florida, we had the Rights Restoration Coalition, which rights restoration has been fought for I think over a decade in the state of Florida. And we just got it in 2018, still facing some legal challenges, but have seen a couple wins here and there. But in order for us to do that, it was data. Data helped us restore the rights to over 1.6 million people. We knew, because of the data, that this had to be a bipartisan thing. We knew, because of the data, what kind of language to use and what language not to use. And now, because we allow for the data to guide what we were doing, we're able to see concrete changes and improvements in people's material conditions. Next slide. So what exactly is data? Data is information that is either witnessed, gathered, remembered, or retold, right? That is data. It is information about our people, and that's data in its most simplest form. I know a lot of folks inside of the progressive space have a tendency to make data seem super isolated, super scary, super frustrating, super complicated, but it's not. Data is nothing but information about our people, what we see, what we ask, what we remember in oral histories and stories that are constantly being retold. Next slide. So data allows for us to provide multiple ways of knowing. I mentioned earlier about us being a bit biased and how we should be testing and stuff. So with data, and as people who will be using data in their work, digital work, on the ground work, all of their work, we have the power to shift our movement culture around by advocating for all the ways of knowing and asking. So what counts as true? So something may be true for Damon, but it may not be true for me, right? And so there can be multiple truths, right? And then whose truth is the most truth? Like, what's really going on? The data is going to allow for us to dig into it, right? It's going to show things that aren't equal and all of the inequalities that may pop up. And then you can go even deeper into that data to see, is there a pattern? How many people are experiencing this way versus the people who are experiencing it this way? And then who are those people? What do they look like? Where do they live? What can we draw a conclusion to based off of this data? And then who gets to produce the knowledge? A lot of times that's reserved for white men, Silicon Valley tech bros, people who went to school for, like, you know, IT or computer engineering or whatever. But it's actually us, the people doing the work. We get to tell our own stories, and we should be the ones producing that knowledge because we're closer to it. And it also says who controls the narrative. If I think back to 2018, I worked on Andrew Gillum's race in the primaries. All of the polls, which of course is powered by data, very specific data, continually polled him in 5th place. It was a 5-person primary race. He was continuously polled in the 5th place. So the narrative was he needs to drop out. He's taking votes. He's doing this. He's yada, yada, yada. He's not viable. But Andrew Gillum actually ended up winning because, well, one, I was the data and analytics director. So I'm looking at the data and I was asking all these questions and making recommendations for us to pivot. So it's like that can be the mainstream narrative, but we know what's true, right? We had a path to victory and we stuck to it. And we were only able to do that because we were looking at our data and we knew exactly where our power lied, and that was with the people. Next slide. So types, data typically fits into 2 buckets. It's either quantitative, which is counting or measuring a thing, or it's qualitative, which is describing or witnessing a thing, right? And so we often, most of the time, people are using mix. At least in my work, I've been using mix, and I feel like everybody does it now. But most of the time, or people should be using a mixed method. And like, for an example, that looks like volunteers overlaying counts of moments of queer activism, past and present, on a state county's map, right? And so that's not just, oh, these are all the incidents where queer things happen and queer leaders and advocates and activists showed up. It's actually showing you some quantitative, some counts and measures, like this is a thing that we should be focusing on. This issue truly matters because this community is bigger than we thought, like, or whatever that case may be. So data typically fits in 2 buckets. Quantitative, being able to count stuff. So you're going to be looking at census data, or you may be looking at petition data. And then in terms of qualitative data, technically you can also say voter file. Voter file is both quantitative and qualitative, because the voter file, when it's accompanied with historical data, that's qualitative data that we just can't pay for, right? And so it's going to tell you when people voted, if they voted in the primaries or not. It's going to tell you how they voted. So that's also a type of qualitative data, because how someone voted isn't a specific count or measure unless you're saying X amount of people voted by mail or X amount of people voted in person. Qualitative data can also be music, art, songs, oral stories of history passed down to one another. And these are all things that we should, if we aren't, trying to incorporate them into our work and how we see and understand data. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Key takeaways. You should always be testing. Everything you do should be guided by the information that you have or the information that you need to collect from your people and supporters. So I hope that felt good. I know I said a lot of things. Questions?
And also I'd love to hear from folks, like what are some key takeaways for you? Folks put together some really great ones recently when we asked you guys at the end of the webinar. Also a reminder, tomorrow, 2 to 3, come and chat with us. We have I sent around the link for the drop-in office hours, and we hope to see you there. If you're running late, that's fine. Like, it's drop-in, right? So if you come late, you might have to wait until we're done talking with somebody else, but we will still be able to talk with you, you know. So yeah, what are some questions and what are some takeaways that you have from today? Deeper insight into planning short campaigns. Yeah. I think it'd be helpful for folks to really think about short-term planning before they think about long-term, because it can be easier. And once you got to learn how to do it, you can then expand it to your bigger work.
Yeah, so this is what I'll say. I'll talk about the Black liberation movement because I'm deeply embedded in that. So overall, we're abolitionists, right? And we want to abolish police and prisons and in the mass incarceration system. Now, there are so many avenues, lanes, and ways we could do that, but we do it by shorter campaign planning, right? We know we're not going to disrupt mass incarceration tomorrow or in a year or in 6 months. So what we do, however, is we pick an issue. We pick an issue to address our problems. And the issues that we've picked over the course of years have varied. One of our most thriving issues is ending the cash bail system. That will literally, you know, do some damage to our current mass incarceration system. So instead of us taking on that entire system and thinking we're going to abolish it, we start with cash bail. How can we end cash bail? How can we do these things? So we're bailing out moms, bailing out dads, sending people home, doing all of this stuff, right? And so you pick a particular issue that will allow for you to get closer to the solution to the problem that you've picked. I can say the same thing about climate change. Climate change is huge, but what issue are you going to use that will get you closer to your North Star? Does that feel good?
Oh, thank you, Jenna, for saying that, saying these have been great sessions. You guys have been great folks to work with, and I hope to see like lots of folks on Friday.